Welcome. Tonight is September 14th, 2022. This is the Upper Dublin School District Finance Committee, and I will call the meeting to order. First, I want to acknowledge we have a new board member who is also a member of this committee, Alima Hawthorne. Alima, can you hear us, and can we hear you? You may not be actually there yet, but she is hopefully connecting remotely tonight. I also want to, in this opening, just acknowledge, as the Facilities Committee, we did successfully open Sandy Run Middle School for the new Sandy Run Middle School for the first time. As far as I know from the outside, everything went absolutely swimmingly. We also opened Fort Washington Elementary School with all students in or attached to the building, shall we say. And that is also something of a triumph. I want to thank everyone who was involved in making that happen, from our own internal staff and our contractors, and also the township, who, working on a very tight timeline, got us the certificate of occupancy in time, and that was not always clearly going to happen. So it's thrilling that it did. So off to a great start to the year. We have one presentation tonight, an update on our transportation fleet and facilities. Take it away, Andy.
Yes, I am going to cover that tonight. So Mr. Robbins was hopeful to be here, but when the meeting changed from Tuesday to Wednesday last month, he unfortunately had an engagement that he couldn't get out of. So I'm going to give this full presentation. I am fully up to speed with everything here, and certainly if we need Chris to weigh in, I think there's further discussion that will probably happen over the coming meetings, that Chris will certainly be available in October to be back here as needed. So I want to begin tonight with an update of our transportation department and some important decisions that we must start to consider about the future of the department. At the end of the presentation, we'll be looking for guidance from the board on the following key items. So we want to begin the process of starting the annual cycle to refresh buses. So we're certainly not looking for an approval to purchase tonight, but just some guidance on how to proceed with that, on obtaining prices and bringing that back for approval in the near future. The need to begin the process of extending our lease agreement for 275 New Jersey Drive, which is our current facility for transportation, and discuss the longer-term strategy for the transportation facility and the considerations required for a longer-term transition, potentially to electric vehicles or EV. All right, we got that working. So just a quick update or a quick refresher of our current transportation operations. So our department, we have a significant transportation department with a staff of 50 over there, which covers a number of different types of staff. And currently drivers are an area where drivers and food service are major areas, but drivers are an area where we are having a significant struggle filling positions. We are not unique in that position. That is a similar position that many school districts across the state are facing right now, a shortage of drivers. So we currently are looking to fill 6 driver positions out of our 40 or so drivers. We currently
Mr. Leckman, can I just make a point about that? So as superintendents across the county, we've been talking about the challenges that we've had with having to find bus drivers. At last count across the county, 71 drivers are needed to bring all staffs to the point that or all districts to the point of being fully staffed. And districts, whether transportation is in-house or it's contracted out, are having similar challenges. What we've not had to do is cancel any of our routes to and from school for any of our district schools or the 47 non-public schools that we transport to. We had one challenge so far this year with sports from Sandy Run Middle School, moving them off-site. Talking with Mr. Pickford, if we encounter those in the future, which we're hoping not to, but if we do, we'll be rotating so that no one sport is affected. But thinking about transporting our kids to our 6 schools and the 47 outside of the district, given our location, I think we can't understate the fact that that's something that we should be happy about because we've not had to disrupt routes to and from school.
So we currently have a fleet of about 50 vehicles that are parked and maintained on site. And I think that's a crucial piece that not everyone understands is we have 2 mechanics that we employ as part of our UDSD contract, and they perform the majority of the maintenance, and we need a facility that allows them to do that. That takes specialized equipment, tools to do that job safely and effectively. And as Dr. Yanni mentioned, the department is responsible for transportation for about 3,500 students to our 6 public schools and 47 non-public schools. So when we look at our replacement plan, so this is something that early on in my tenure here working with Mr. Robbins, we looked at our fleet, we looked at the current condition, mileage, and we track that on a regular annual basis, and we make recommendations on our plan to replace our fleet. And what this table shows is that we currently have 6 vehicles on the road that are over 15 years old with mileages up to 200,000 miles. Those were the vehicles that we replaced, that we approved replacement of last year. It has taken a year and a half almost. We just learned today that they're finally in production and we'll receive them hopefully by the end of November. So it's taking about a year and a half to get those. So what we're looking to do is start the process to replace kind of that second column there, or the third column over, the 11 to 15 years. We want to start replacing those vehicles now. So hopefully in a year or so, we'll be replacing those, and then we'll look to replace the other in that category as well. So you can see that still leaves, if we replace the 5 buses in the greater than 15 column and we start to replace the 11 to 15, we'll still have another batch to approve next year, which will get those older vehicles wrapped up in line with our replacement plan. So what we're looking to replace are 5 buses and 1 van starting next year, and we'd like to get that process started. Again, we'd like to just start to get pricing to bring back to the board for consideration, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So again, here is our replacement plan strategy, and as we look at our plan, you can see our short term is we want to replace the oldest vehicles. We started that process. We're hopefully going to have those in a few months. Over the next 2 years, we want to replace the second batch of older vehicles, so 12 more vehicles. And you can see the costs associated with that. We're looking at about $500,000 this year, which was already approved and part of our financing plan. So we'll pay for that out of our capital reserve budget. We'll look to replace 5 more this year. 6 more, 5 buses and 1 van, which is about $500,000, and then $575,000 would be out in the 24-25 year. Again, start the process this year. We would receive them and pay for them next year because it takes time to accomplish that. So as we discussed last year when we started this discussion, there was quite a bit of conversation and questions around EV and electric vehicles. So last year we said that before we bring recommendations to the board about, or at the same time we bring recommendations to the board about starting a replacement cycle, we would just give you a quick update on alternative fuels, what's out there, what's happening in the market. And that's sort of what this slide gets to here. And you can see that Mr. Robbins and we continue to review this, and most of our vehicles, and I'm going to jump back 2 slides, most of our vehicles, as you can see, are diesel vehicles. So we've got a lot of old diesel vehicles. We've got 31 diesel and 19 gasoline. Only 5 of our buses are gasoline. So gasoline is our preferred next step in order to replace older diesel vehicles. Gasoline, as you know, is readily available. We can get it at the pump. There are companies like Gas It Up that we've been starting conversations with that can actually fuel on site. So we believe gasoline is the immediate short-term solution to get new vehicles into the cycle of our older vehicles. The other 2 options are propane, obviously, and electric. And propane and electric we're looking at specifically because they fall into the clean fuel category. They're both require significant investments in infrastructure in order to implement, though. And I think cost for propane is very similar in many ways to gasoline and diesel. Cost for electric is a significant barrier as we start to look at the electric vehicle market. But propane is certainly an option. What we would need in order to move to propane, if that was something we desired to do, we would need our own fuel pump on site. And that's not something we have the ability to do at our current facility or any new facilities that we talk about. We would certainly need to put a pump in specifically for propane if we went in that direction. In the EV market, EV is certainly an option that continues to grow. I think we see out there in the market, we've got companies, especially large companies, Ford, GM, obviously you have Tesla that's been growing. That EV in the car market, the car market has been growing significantly. In the school bus market, EV is still a fairly new technology that is growing and expanding every single day. So it's certainly an option that the board desired to at least look at and review. And from our standpoint, as we evaluate EV, we view the barriers today, not long-term, but today as cost and infrastructure. And I think infrastructure being the primary barrier that we face right now. Without the proper infrastructure in place, the purchase of even one electric vehicle is really not a feasible option for us. So again, I just noted some things up there as we're learning about it. We need access to a transformer. We have to install switchgear, install charging stations. That requires concrete pad, conduit, running of electric. So there's a lot of pieces in place that need to be or put in place before we can consider EV. And only after the infrastructure barriers are overcome can, from our perspective, can we really start to consider purchasing EV vehicles. Technology in general, so EV is not currently available in passenger vans. So one of the things that Mr. Robbins and I talked about was, okay, maybe that buses aren't possible, but can we look at the vans? And we reached out to a couple of Chris's contacts, and EV is not currently available in passenger vans, at least for schools. Miles per charge are still limited to 140 miles per charge. For us, that really is not a barrier. We don't have many buses that are on the road over 140 miles per day. Certainly there's some that may run field trips in the middle of the day that we may need to consider, but again, that would be a longer term issue. So I assume over time that technology will only continue to improve, which should make that better over time. And charging stations only charge one vehicle at a time right now, so there's a significant amount of time, 4 hours per vehicle to get a full charge on a vehicle. Now again, that's from 0 to 100, so certainly there's some range in there, but time is another factor that we face in the charging process. We've also been exploring EPA Clean School Bus Rebate Program, and we've been in discussions with a company that helps school districts with EV fleet implementations and rollovers. So we think there is some possibility there. The company that we're talking with, it's Highland Fleet Services. They actually made very clear that we are likely not a candidate to receive an award for that rebate program in round one, nor do I think, again, as we're discussing tonight, are we ready? They actually suggested we apply for that now because there will likely be future rounds of that rebate program, whereas if you are in round one, it potentially gives you a better place in line as future rounds could be rolled out on this. So I certainly don't expect to be approved in round one. Maybe we'll be surprised by that, but at least it gets our interest in front of the EPA in this program, and as future rounds come out, we could have a better chance of receiving that. And again, I think we'd be potentially in a better place in the future as we consider EV. So again, just a note, current transportation facility, if EV was to become part of our desired long-term solution and strategy, we would need to make a decision and move away from the current district leased facility, which is something that we've already started discussing. So it's important to begin to discuss this now because we are again approaching the end of our current lease at 275 New Jersey Drive. It ends at the end of this year, 2023, June 30th, 2023. And I think right now, we have no choice but to discuss at least extending that lease. As Dewey told us when they brought the feasibility plan before this committee, it would be about 2 years in order to get a full project complete. A year, just a year of that, or a little under a year, was to get through the land development process with the township. So we certainly, no matter what the guidance is tonight or over the next few months, are not going to be in a position to move away from that facility by the end of this year. So we certainly need to discuss the extension process, but we'll have to talk about what that looks like. The facility, I will say, is meeting our basic needs, but it leaves a lot to be desired. We're dealing with the property owner right now with some leaks and water in the facility, so it's not an ideal facility for our operation or for our staff to even have to work in its current condition. It also, from my perspective, is not ideal to invest funds in a facility that we do not own, especially long-term infrastructure investments if EV is the decision of how we want to start to proceed. There's also no guarantee that the property owner will allow us to invest and make those types of improvements to that property. So again, anything we want to do to that property, we have to ask for permission from the property owner. And also on this slide, you can see I reviewed this the last time we talked about it, but the district, we currently pay over $450,000 every single year in lease and other rental fees in order to have our transportation facility at this location. So as we start to consider what's next, I want to just loop us back to the strategic planning process that we went through this year, or last year. So one of the main items that the Facilities and Finance Committee actually talked about was looking at our facilities and setting ourselves up to be prepared for technology as it changes and rolls out in the future. And I think this is a good opportunity to really wrap that back around. Make sure we're in compliance with our strategic action plan, and consider how we move forward. Is a transportation facility what we want? Is EV the way we want to start to move? And if that's the case, then we should start to position ourselves now, especially, like I said, if we have potential to leverage grants and rebate programs, federal, state, in order to fund some of these initiatives. And again, the goal is not to implement this immediately, but again, to just position ourselves to take advantage of this. And the technology is happening. It's going to be here. We don't think it's ready right now, but it certainly will be in the next couple of years. So with that, all this leads us back to the conversation of the potential for building our own transportation facility. It's not a new discussion. It's a discussion that we started, a year and a half to 2 years ago. It was paused by the tornado that happened in September of 2021, as that reprioritized some of what we needed to do from a district facility and planning perspective. And as a quick summary, we primarily evaluated the 309 site, which sits between Fort Washington Elementary and the Field of Dreams. And the reason, again, that we discussed that site was it's owned by the district. It's currently not being used. We've already, the board approved and we completed a feasibility study and air quality study on that site. The infrastructure is partially in place. And again, we talked about infrastructure that was there. There also just happens to be with the tornado work or the modulars being installed there for the insurance claim work that's going over there. They had to put a transformer in the back by the modulars in order to support the modulars. So that transformer will actually stay back at that site. So it's just another piece of infrastructure that already exists at that location that, again, continues to make it a location that should be strongly considered by the board. In consideration with the longer-term infrastructure plans, we recommend making a significant change from the prior design, though. So if we're considering EV, if the board's consideration is EV, if you remember part of that design here, and it's up here in that middle, we actually talked about a fueling station. And actually, we would probably recommend, if we moved forward at this site or actually any site, not installing a fueling station and use that money potentially for infrastructure for EV. And the reason we think that's feasible is because we're doing without it right now, right? We fuel at the pump right now. Like I said, we have another company that we've been talking to called Gas It Up, which will actually come to the facility and fuel our vehicles up at a similar price to what we're paying now. So I think there's options where we don't need to talk about a fueling station if EV is where we want to move. And then there's the potential, as I discussed, we want to get to a 10-year replacement cycle for our vehicles. So there's potential that once we start this and we have the infrastructure in place, that we could have a 10-year implementation plan to fully transition all of our vehicles, and that would kind of become the long-term plan of the district for our transportation department. So the other option, just I know we've been kind of discussing, are there other options out there? And again, we think another potential option, again, when we look at district-owned land, there's potential for the district office. If you know, right next to the district office, there's a parking lot there, and then there's fields. Those fields are used by school districts, sports teams, and community groups. So it's currently being used, unlike the 309 site, but it's certainly an option that could be considered. In order to fully consider it, we would need to go through a similar process like we did for the 309 site. We would recommend a facility or a feasibility study be completed. That was about $15,000 for the last one that we did. And the 309 site, just to compare, is approximately 3 acres. This site here is a little over 9 acres. So again, I think the feasibility study would help us determine where that could sit on this. Maybe only some of it is impacted, maybe all of it is impacted, but I think that feasibility study would help us lay out the options. Non-district owned options, there certainly is the potential for sites out in the community. It's very limited, but our focus remains on district owned land options for cost considerations. So if you think about it, not only would, if we considered a non-district owned parcel of land, we would have to pay for the land and pay for any improvements that are on the land, we would also be pulling a property off of our tax rolls. So there would be one-time costs, there would be recurring revenue impacts to the district for non-district owned land considerations. So to wrap it up, as I mentioned at the beginning, we are looking for guidance from the board on 3 main items, right? Right now, we're recommending that we begin the process to bid or obtain state contract pricing for 5 gasoline powered buses and 1 gasoline van. Again, the board's not necessarily approving that purchase tonight. We're just looking on guidance to proceed to gather pricing and bring that back for consideration. I'm interested in the board's guidance on the facility lease. So we're recommend beginning discussions with the property owner to enter into a 4th amendment. My thoughts are a multiple year amendment with options to extend. That's what our prior amendment actually was. So we had, I think it was a 4-year agreement with multiple options. There were multiple years to extend that, so it gave us a little flexibility. Again, that would be pending, obviously, negotiations with the property owner. And then EV in general is looking for guidance on if EV is the desired long-term solution and how the board wishes to proceed with the consideration of a new facility that can support EV infrastructure. And I will wrap it up by saying that one other note about this, if EV is the desired long-term solution, while there are certainly right now no discussions about outsourcing transportation, nor can that be considered while we are under contract with UDSD, with our transportation folks, I think there's a question about if that would not be a good use of district resources if there was ever a consideration of outsourcing transportation. And my answer to that is no, especially if the district required the contractor to utilize EV vehicles. The district would ultimately either pay for that additional cost for the contractor or potentially not get interested bidders if we wanted to use EV. And also, if you think about it, if we outsource to a contractor, the cost of their facility is certainly built into any contract. So you don't see it necessarily, but it's built into their pricing because they have to have a facility. So if we ever decided to move down that path, I think utilizing a facility that we, if the decision was to build one, we would make that a requirement of the contractors to utilize our facility, and then that would not be a cost that we would bear as part of the contract. So certainly things to consider. That was my information or update on the Transportation Department. Lots to discuss, I'm sure, so I'm happy to answer questions as we go through it.
All right, thanks, Andy. So a couple things it sounds like the administration would like comments from the committee on. Anyone want to comment? Jenna?
So that was a great and very comprehensive presentation, Mr. Leckman. I appreciate it. So this is one of the, this was actually a pet project of Mr. Henderson's. I know he was really interested in EV technology and TTA, yeah, to be fair. So this is, again, one of many unfortunate reasons why why we'll miss him. But I personally, I'm really interested in EV technology. I think it's, understandably, one of the concerns we hear from the township is about emissions. I mean, just in general, that's an issue I personally care about, and I think it's, again, it's good for the township. So I'm really interested in that technology personally. I'm, at the same time, obviously concerned about the cost. One thing I don't think touched on in here, so costs for the vehicles. Can we talk about that just a little bit? Because I know we talked about infrastructure cost, of course, but one of the things, if I recall correctly from prior conversations, is the vehicles themselves are obviously much more expensive as well. Do you have any ballpark on that? I can look back at my notes, but you may know.
Yeah. I would roughly estimate they were right now, around $300,000, whereas our current vehicles are costing us about $100,000. But that's where potentially, again, I can't guarantee we would receive any grants or rebates, but that's where there's some potential for grants and rebates to help reduce those costs.
I think just to follow up on that, it's worth mentioning, I don't know that there's a lot of data on this in buses, but there's certainly a lot of data on it in passenger vehicles. The upfront cost for electric vehicles is higher. The maintenance cost is lower. I should say it's not just maintenance. The total cost of ownership, the annual cost of ownership is lower.
Somebody else can go, and then I'm probably going to circle back with some more. I know Titia's itching.
Yeah, TTA.
Of course, yeah. No, I'm very excited that we're looking at EV and also that we're moving away from diesel. I think, Mr. Langman, just for clarification, with our 5 new buses that are coming, right? We're then going from 22 diesel. We're then going to 22 diesel and 10 gasoline. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right. So that makes it look a little bit better. I think in terms of the long term, yes, I do think we should go to EV. Are there any projects or any incentives that you are aware of that will make it possible for us to do like a prototype so that we know what it takes to really operate an EV vehicle, and could we do that? I mean, if we have a transformer, if we have a slab, could we have one bus as a prototype? Could we put things in motion I mean, it may take us 2-3 years to get there, but to have that in place as, well, let's get the experience so we really know what we're getting in for and then build on that.
Well, again, it comes down to infrastructure. So could we? I'm sure we could. I guess the question is, how much are we willing to invest and where are we putting this, right? I don't think we could put it, at least we couldn't put it in our current facility, leased facility, unless we get approval from the owner. Then we'd have to look at parking it at one of the schools and building infrastructure at one of the schools to support that. So is it possible? I'm sure it's possible. The question is, do we want to invest money in order to put one in just somewhere without a long-term plan in place?
Yeah, I mean, I think all these will take time. I mean, I think we're looking at probably 5 years or so from now. And I think if we do putting in a prototype now or plan for that, then we might be in a better position 5 years from now, I mean, assuming it's 5 years, to really know what we want to do. I mean, I think at this point, it looks really attractive on paper. My gut feels is that since school transportation is such a national and uniquely American thing to do, that there will be incentives for companies to really develop that and make that attractive to districts. But yeah, I would like to see us really push hard for a prototype if we can be somewhat creative on that. In terms of the numbers that I saw for personnel, of the staff, the 50, I assume that the vast majority are drivers, right? They all need parking. I mean, everybody needs a parking space, but is it possible, if we are looking at the location of the, well, yeah, the structure, the office structure, does that actually physically need to be in the same location as where the buses are and the bus drivers park their own vehicles, or can that space be somewhere else? The reason I'm asking is that I wonder if bus drivers, I mean, are using the office space for, yeah, between rides, and yeah, can we does it all need to be in the same location, or can it be distributed?
I would say it should all be in the same location, right? Again, because it comes down to maintenance. So if you remember the facility as it was designed, there was very little of that was actually office space and meeting space for drivers, right? There was enough office space for the folks that we have that work in the office, like Chris and the manager and the administrative assistant. The majority of that building was for maintenance, for the mechanics to do maintenance on the vehicles. So I would think it makes sense for it all to be in the same location.
Yeah, but even now with the rental and that office space that you're renting now, does that have to be on that site? Or could we, I mean, from our, I mean, it's not the huge cost, but the trailer is still $110,000 a year. Do we need that space on that site at the moment?
So I think we need that on the site. I mean, Chris needs to be where the drivers are. So yes, I think it needs to be there. Yep.
I think that's it for right
now. One thought I had, okay, so there's a couple questions here. One is, do we think EV is the direction we want to go? Yes. This is a strong yes from me. I think getting a single prototype in would be helpful as a learning experience. Whether it would make sense to invest in temporary infrastructure in order to facilitate that learning experience, it's not so obvious to me. I don't think that what we would learn, my instinct is, as an EV owner, what we would learn is not worth the expense of building temporary facilities for that purpose. I would rather move as quickly as we can because I believe EV is the direction, move as quickly as we can to getting to an EV capable facility. And then the sooner we can get the first one in, the better. And maybe it's just one because the nature of grants and cost and all those kinds of things, but we would have the final place to do it. That's my instinct on that. I do wonder, as I said, the maintenance on EVs is lower. They're just so much less complicated than internal combustion engines. I do wonder if, as we look at the facility and as it was designed, design is a little strong, as the schematics we had a 4-bay, the schematics we had a 4-bay facility. I do wonder if EV is the direction, whether it still needs to be a 4-bay facility. That's one for Chris, I think, to consider. But that's a potential place for savings on the facility side that could go into the purchase of buses or building the charging infrastructure, whatever it is. I also hope that as we consider charging infrastructure, I certainly would like to consider solar, park the buses under solar canopies or something, whatever lots of districts have gotten ahead of us on this, and we'll have figured out nationwide what good strategies are, but certainly would like to consider charging from solar, or at least solar in addition to line power. That's my take on the direction for EV. Anyone want to comment on the facility questions?
So real quick, just before we move off the EV topic. One thing that I think we'd just be remiss if we didn't at least talk about. So, three options, right? We have gasoline, propane, which we haven't talked about. I did some Googling, which is not the most official source, so you can tell me if you know better, but propane is clearly more environmentally friendly than gasoline, but I don't think it's drastically so. I was seeing numbers in like the 12 to 15% range. Again, I may be putting you on the spot. You may not know that, but again, I think we'd be remiss not talking about it, but I don't think it's, again, dramatically going to reduce our carbon footprint if that's ultimately what we're shooting for here. Is that fair?
Yeah, and certainly I'm not able to speak on the percentages or how much cleaner it might be. The only thing, again, I can note is that when we look at the rebate program that the EPA has out there, a propane bus is eligible for rebate under that program because it is a cleaner fuel. How much cleaner is certainly something we can learn more about.
I think, Mr. Luckman, I know a number of districts in Bucks County moved to propane, and I believe we can check, but I believe as they continued their refresh cycles, they went back to gasoline because of the cost difference and the minimal difference. But we can check that and bring that back to the board.
In my readings on this over the last, year or whatever it's been, propane seems to be, for many districts, a transition fuel, as sort of gasoline is from us, from diesel towards EV. It doesn't make sense to me to go diesel to gasoline to propane to EV. If EV is the destination, let's just get there.
So if we want to transition to the facility, so look, I think we need a facility. Obviously, the really big question is the where and how much are we spending on it. I mean, I'll go on record saying I think, like some others, I was surprised at the price tag of the prior bid. I would really like for it to not be that high, and I think, Mark, you had a great potential idea of something that might bring it down if it was EV, for example. Maybe we don't need as many maintenance bays. But I think for now, right, the question you really need us to answer, so my answer on do we need a facility is a resounding yes, because again, I think it's necessary for this EV technology. The where is really the question, right? So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, what you really need input on for now is, do we want to do a feasibility study at this secondary site, right? This one is tough for me. I'm going to be honest, because these fields I know get a lot of use. We have a shortage of fields in the township, candidly. So I really struggle with losing these fields. On the other hand, of course, I've heard and I'm sensitive to the community input on the proximity of the other site to the Fort Washington Elementary School. One of the questions for me about the alternate site is, of course, as you mentioned, this is over 9 acres. we clearly aren't going to need that much because the facility we've been looking at, or the site we've been looking at, is only about 3, I think you said, right? So we're only going to need a fraction of it. So for me, it's really crucial to understand the where, the how much. Are we going to lose 1 field? Are we going to lose 2 fields? So, part of me, kind of cringes a little bit at continuing to do feasibility studies because, obviously that's, to the extent we don't build there, it's not money, well spent. But I think on the other hand, we need to know. I mean, it's hard for me to make a decision without knowing what this might look like at this alternate facility. So I'm probably in favor of doing another feasibility study. Again, I cringe, but I don't know how to make the decision without it. So that's my take.
If I could just interrupt, and obviously the board has to decide if you want to do the feasibility study or not. One of the things that we have to keep in mind too is the amount of time that the project is going to take, and the feasibility study, Mr. Leckman, how long would a feasibility study? I just want everyone to have eyes wide open so that we know what the impact.
I feel like it took us about 3 months. And
Okay.
again, that was from getting an RFP out until it was completed.
Right. So in no way am I saying we shouldn't do it because of the time. We just have to know that would, you would add, or you would delay the ultimate opening of a new facility by a number of months.
Yeah, I mean, the cost of renting the current facility is, in my opinion, very large. I mean, $500,000 a year. With that, I mean, if you compare that to the 20K or 15 for a feasibility study, that's of course small. The timeline, I think, is the bigger issue here. One of the questions I really had, if we would go with that feasibility study, what is it that we're going to ask? Because is the feasibility going to be the access to the site? Because I think the big attraction at the current or at the 309 site is that the access could be through the access road off of Loch Elsh, and you potentially have other, exits on multiple locations. I don't see that as easily available on this other location, unless there is a possibility to make an access road to what currently is the Temple Emler campus. I think if we are not able to have another access road, then I don't think it's I don't think it's even feasible or even deserves consideration, because I think the traffic, that part of Fort Washington Avenue is very narrow compared to what we see at Loch Elsh and at Highland Avenue. So in that respect, I'm not sure that we're going to gain a whole lot by that, other than that we have a choice, and then perhaps building in one location is a lot cheaper than in another location. We have more space, so if the concern is that one site is too narrow or too small, we would do that. The other thing is, do we know? We don't know yet what the township is going to do with their township site. If that access road from Loch Elsh will be that second, currently we have through the, we can get to the one parking lot access. But if there's that other access road that goes in front of the old library, that would be an additional place to go. And I think if we would get access to that, that would be another benefit to the Fort Washington site. So I'm a little torn about looking at another location. I think in terms of impact on the community and everything, I do hear the concerns, but I think 309 at this point is the bigger concern, and that is there, and that will not change. With the move to EV vehicles, I think that's the better investment to do, put our emphasis on that and build a facility at the 309 site.
Yeah, a feasibility study, I think, would tell us, the question the feasibility study answered really at the other site was, will it fit? We didn't really know if it would fit. And now I think we're talking about it'll fit even a little more comfortably if we don't have a fueling station, and maybe even if the building can be smaller. That doesn't necessarily save much money because the infrastructure, we need charging infrastructure, potentially solar infrastructure, but it will fit. The question I think that a feasibility study answers over here at the site over by the administration building is, what would we lose in terms of playing fields? My understanding is these playing fields are used for school educational purposes in that right now kids are being bused from Sandy Run because we don't have fields at Sandy Run. But when we do have fields at Sandy Run, I'm assuming that won't happen anymore. So it would be, similar to many years ago when we talked about it on the Field of Dreams site. These are fields that are used for youth sports organizations, but not necessarily for the school by the time we get around to doing this. That's not to say that doesn't matter, but it's different than I think than if it's a school purpose. But I think we would need to know, we would learn what we would lose in terms of field space. There are, houses across the street from the southwestern end of that site. There are no houses at the northeastern end. Those houses are no closer than they would be to the 309 site, or no further, about the same distance. But having a sense for what it would look like would be nice. On the other hand, like I said, I think we should be getting to EV, to a facility that can support EV as quickly as possible. And I'm not sure that, there's nothing about this site that strikes me as better enough, and potentially it's worse. There's nothing that makes it better enough than the 309 site. So I'm inclined to move ahead with 309 site and not take the time to do a feasibility study. But if the will of the board is to do a feasibility study, I'm not going to complain too much. So with that, let me open it up to the rest of the board. Comments on any of this? Jeff?
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate it. This dialogue is very informative and enlightening, and Andy, thanks for the presentation. On the EV point, I'm 100% in agreement with the discussion. We need to move to EV. I think that's a no-brainer. The way I do the math, following up on Tisha's question, like if we're going to be at 22 and 10. If we do approve another 5, we move to 17 and 15. So we're balancing that out, and it looks like we have a significant number of buses in the 0 to 5 range. So if we get into a technological advance that we can move to EV 5 years from now, roughly, we're going to have a lot of buses that could shift there if we have the capacity for it. So I'm definitely in favor of that. In terms of the discussion about a prototype, I sort of agree with Mark's sentiment there that although in theory it would be great, I do worry a little bit that if we figured out where to put it in to create a trial run, we're spending money on something that's not ultimately either being used or being used to its potential, and that we might be more cost efficient if we build it right into the new facility, even as a starter point, and maybe it's sort of a de facto prototype because we go in small increments and this technology is still developing. But to me, that's more the way to go than just to try to figure out a place to try something short term. And I tie that with the idea of that if and when we get to a new facility, which I am also in favor of, I think we need to think about like forward-thinking design from the perspective of a couple of things that struck me that Andy said is transformers, concrete pads, that infrastructure. I'd want our designer to really be thinking about if we get to the point that we have a whole EV fleet, let's say in 10 years, I don't know if that's realistic or not, do we have room for expansion? I mean, is that 1 transformer? Is that 2 transformers? Is that 3 pads? Is that 12 pads? I mean, I got a little confused, Andy, when you said that for the concrete, to charge based on what we know at the moment, I know all this can change, that we could connect 3 but only charge 1 at a time. So we essentially need a concrete pad for every bus to be charged then, or not?
One concrete pad per charger, 3 buses per charger.
But then they charge sequentially. So in a timing perspective, you go like 4 hours bus A, 4 hours bus B, and 4 hours bus C.
That is correct.
I got you now. So anyway, that's sort of more of a global sentiment, like when we get to design, that I think that's something that we really need to focus on and make sure our design team is focused on. In terms of the facility, I mean, I think we need to move away from the leased facility as promptly as possible. I agree 100% with that. Discussion on the feasibility study for the other site, I wavered, I think, as most board members do. In my mind, I lean slightly toward doing the feasibility study of the other site. And when Tisha said, you know, what do we want to find out? And then Mark, you said, kind of, does it fit? I mean, to me, feasibility study is somewhat self-definitional. Is it feasible? Where? And sort of how does it fit? And so to have, if nothing else, a barometer to know where it would go, what field or fields it might take away or not take away, how it might, whether we need access roads, whether carving in things like that would ultimately be on a conceptual level, not detailed design, but on a conceptual level, according to somebody, either more expensive or less expensive. To me, that becomes important information. I balance that as I sit here to say, okay, A, it's $15,000 or $20,000. To me, that would be money well spent to develop that barometer. The other thing I sit here and put on my scale is the time. Like Dr. Yanni said, 3 months. And to me, especially if we're thinking about a 2-year lease with an extension, realizing as much as we want to get away from the current place, and the current place is becoming a drain on us both from an operational standpoint, and it's also not good for us financially, to me, 3 months is not that big of a delay. And I would sway toward doing the feasibility study so that we can have as much information to make that comparison on 2 district-owned sites as possible. I could be pushed the other way. I hear what all of you are saying to the contrary, but for my 2 cents sitting here right now, I would say let's do the study on the other site.
Andy?
I probably have more questions than statements, but my first question is this. So we have the 309 site, as an option, and then you bring the other one tonight, which is, Fort Washington Avenue, essentially. Is that it for district-owned property? I mean, is that it? Those are the options?
I think so.
The other properties we own are the school properties. None of them have unused space. Could you find, 3 or 4 acre corner somewhere in one of them? Maybe. But there's no clear.
The reason I ask this is because the public is sitting here listening to this discussion, maybe an assumption, but the notion is that, we want to do this. I think everybody sits here and goes, yeah, I think we need something to move forward. So, but we also have to understand we have limited options, and they probably both have drawbacks to a certain degree. And the question is, you have to pick your poison. But I think this whole thing, in terms of what we're leasing now, what are we going to do in terms of a location? I think timing is the linchpin of all of this. And I don't know how the pieces fit. I may not be smart enough to figure that out. But Jeff was just talking about the bus ages, right? And we're replacing 5 this year, replacing 5 the next. So essentially then, you're going to have a fleet where, if my math is right, somewhere out of 50 buses, 80% of them are going to be less than 10 years old. So how do you then transition to electric buses with a bus fleet that's that young? Are you going to sell the buses? Is there a way to recoup some of that money? Because you're investing $100,000, $500,000 for buses now, up to $1 million next year when you add them together. How do you get that money back? And that's why I think that the timing of this is so difficult, because I think that we should be building for tomorrow, not for today. I think building something that is EV-centric with an add-on so that we can maintain some gasoline-powered buses as the transition goes is how we need to be focused. But there are so many moving parts with what we've got leased now, with the bus ages. You know, I imagine, and I don't know this for a fact, but it's my recollection that there's something in the bill that was passed this past summer by Congress to spur electric energy development. I can't believe that public schools can't be a piece of that somehow. I think all that is going to start to move quickly, and I think that if we're building something for today, we're making a huge mistake instead of building something for tomorrow. I just, you know, I don't know how you shift the buses. Like Titia's idea about having a prototype, I think that's a great idea. Let's get one or get two, but by the same token, if we're going to do a prototype, let's get 5. Like, let's start to actually transition it, because otherwise, you do have to make an investment of big dollars to get onto the new technology. And I think if you try to do it in too piecemeal of a way, you can't get there, at least not in a way that is economical. I have a million other questions, but I can't figure them out right now, so I'll stop.
If I could just add, I'm totally in support of EV. What makes me pause just a little bit is, and I'm not trying to say that we shouldn't be building for the future, because I think we should. We keep hearing the technology's coming, but every year they're saying it's 5 years out, it's 5 years out. It's been 5 years out now for a couple years, you know, and last year there were headlines that the school district of Philadelphia moved to EV buses, 5 buses out of a fleet of, you know, however many they have, you know. So I think it's also incumbent upon us just to be cognizant that, yes, it's coming, and we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, but I also don't want to build something that we have to retract at some point because it's not going to be ready in the time frame that we think it's going to be ready.
And I appreciate where you're coming from, but I think that one thing that I know I did see is that one thing that the federal government's going to start doing is they're going to start building electric charging stations. And so when that happens, more people are going to buy, more consumers are going to buy electric technology. And as that demand goes up, other industries are going to want access to that, because it's going to make it easier for trucks. It's going to make it easier for step vans, all the stuff. Like you mentioned, they don't have a passenger van now. That's going to change. And we're not buying the vehicle tomorrow. Obviously, we need to buy a regular passenger van. But the fact of the matter is that I don't want to be looking out from the outside when this stuff does incrementally take a quick jump forward, and we're sitting there going, well, we still have 6 diesel, you know, school buses. What are we doing with them? So I just think we have to keep. Maybe we're going to be a little bit on the cutting edge. Maybe some of that is going to be more expensive because we're in front of it as opposed to behind it. But I think that if you go EV, it takes away all the community's concerns about pollution, about noise. And again, we don't have 17 different sites to pick from, so we've got to pick the best of what we've got.
Darlene.
Okay, just to reiterate, I think, again, this has been a good discussion. I think for me, one of the important things is that we obviously should not be purchasing land anywhere else. I think it's important that we use what we have. So that does boil down to the 2 sites. For me, I need to know a little bit more about where it would be if we did it near the district office. Those fields are used in the community, and I think they're important to have in our community. So I don't want us to build a site there if indeed it's going to take away all of that field space. At the same time, with 9 acres, and we only have 3 at the other site, it very well may be that there is room there, and we still can have our fields, and then I would feel comfortable, considering that as a site. I think we also have to consider total costs. And, one thing that is very intriguing to me is the fact that the transformer has already been built at Fort Washington. And when you start adding that cost and having to do, maybe some of those other things at a new site, then we may go back to Fort Washington is the best site. But I think I agree with Ms. Evans when she says we need to have all the information. And I don't feel comfortable making a decision that Fort Washington is the site without having a little more information on whether Fort Washington is a possibility. So I would support doing a feasibility study because I don't think we can waste time in purchasing more gasoline vehicles if we're going in a different direction. And as everybody's been saying, there's no sense building up that fleet if we're I'd rather delay and keep the buses on the road a little bit longer than to purchase new vehicles when we know we're trying to move away from that. So I think we really need to map out, like, where would we be, because we need to pull the trigger. So, because it's hard to plan ahead without, knowing exactly when we're going to be doing this. So I do feel strongly that we shouldn't, obviously some we have to replace right away, but to go a couple years every year, but buying new gasoline vehicles, I don't think is the appropriate thing to do either. So if we're going EV, I think we need to, kind of look, when do we start purchasing those vehicles and how soon can we get a facility so that we can support it?
I'm appreciating this discussion. Everybody has such good insight. So I support switching to EV. My question would be, does it require more personnel? And does it require overnight personnel to charge the vehicles? And I have a few other comments. You can think about that while I'm making my other comment. Just because right now we are having a hard time hiring bus drivers, is that going to be a problem that we would need more people to charge the vehicles? My other comments are, with the alternate site, I believe there's a lot of history there, maybe a historical landmark. And if we did the feasibility study, is that going to be included? Because I wouldn't want to get into it and then find out, because I believe it was a stop on the Underground Railroad over there. So I wouldn't want to be halfway into the project, find this out, and then we can't do all that. So just, you look like you want to comment on that.
Yeah, so I would more than assume, I would almost guarantee that as part of the feasibility study, we would have to work with the Historical Commission at the township to determine if we would be encroaching on any land. So, for instance, we're very limited to what we can do at the farmhouse and the barn. And in fact, I have to check, I think even if we would ever decide that we didn't want to use those facilities, we would, there's in the bill of sale, there's very specific things that we have to do. And in fact, I think we might have to turn it back over to Historical Society. But we would have to, as part of that feasibility study, understand where we could do things and where we can't so that we wouldn't encroach on historical space.
And then my next question would be, when we're looking at the two sites, if we put this transportation center there, how does it change the value of that property? So they're different properties. One's kind of in between the township building and an elementary school. The other one's more open field. So to me, one of them is probably would be more impacted in a change in value. And I would like to figure that into our decision if we do the feasibility study. And lastly, would either of these projects possibly improve the areas, make the playing fields better, or make, over at Fwez has a drainage issue, and that would, go into my decision of which is a better location.
So similar to what happened when we were looking to build the new Sandy Run, there were some road improvements that we needed to do. There was some water retention improvements that we would need to do. And part of that feasibility study and going through land development with the township, we would be given a list of requirements. And part of doing the feasibility study, we would want to know what those requirements were going to be that the township was going to ask of us or require from us, because I think that could also tip the scales in one direction or the other. So that would definitely be part of the conversation.
And I will add, I feel very confident in saying this, but I will follow up. I don't believe this would add any staff. Again, my understanding is the charger, you can one charger to 3 buses, they all plug in at the same time, and then it just it should happen automatically, the transition from one vehicle to the other once the charge is complete.
All right. Are we expecting that we'll still be transporting 3,500 or so students 5, 10 to 15 years from now? Because I know there are legal requirements on that at the moment. Is there anything in the crystal ball that may suggest that some of that may change? And will that either higher or lower impact what we are looking at?
I think the only thing that is going to force a legislative change around transporting students is a true national crisis in being able to hire bus drivers. That being said, I think in communities like Upper Dublin and communities like ours, despite what any change would come in the legislation, I think there will be tremendous pressure to still, like, let's say, right now I believe it's a mile for secondary kids or a mile and a half for secondary, 2 miles for secondary. One of the things that's been thrown around at the state level is, do they increase that radius? Or do they say you don't need to have a seat for every eligible rider? You have to have a seat for only 80% of them. I don't know, short of a real crisis, if anyone legislatively is going to take on that charge to make that type of change. But that's something that we stay obviously in tune with, because this is a topic on every one of our statewide calls, especially at the beginning of the year.
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, it is the crystal ball, right? 2 other smaller questions. The gas it up option, does that require all the buses to be available at the same time? A little bit more on the mechanics of that one?
Yeah, I mean, they would work with our schedule. So they certainly want to fill up as much as our vehicles as they possibly can. So I don't think there's any that they all have to be available at the same time or not. I think we would just work out a schedule with them to figure that out.
But is that likely to be in the evening, nights, or during the school day?
We didn't get into that close of detail with them, so I'm not sure, but we could certainly have more discussions with them to figure that out.
And then my last question on this is, since Philadelphia is having the 5, what kind of process is there to learn from their experiences? Because I think that at least, if we're not, and I see the disadvantages of having a prototype and no infrastructure, getting costs related to a potential prototype, but what can we leverage from Philadelphia's experience? Is our transportation director in close communication on that?
Chris has been in contact with their transportation director, so certainly there's quite a bit to learn. We've already learned some of the information that was in here. We learned from Philadelphia. I think working with a company like Highland certainly brings a level of learning to us as well. But yes, we have already been in contact with Philadelphia, and that's certainly something Chris could talk more about at a future meeting. That's the great thing about working with school districts. School districts are always willing to kind of learn from and help each other.
Yeah, and along those lines, what we really learned from Philadelphia, because they're the only district right now in Pennsylvania, so they're learning sort of the Pennsylvania-specific things around how they're addressing regulation changes and things that would have to happen to facilitate, because, buses are highly regulated. But there are other places elsewhere in the nation that are ahead of Pennsylvania, and there's already lots to learn from them as well. Any other comments? I know Alima was with us briefly. I don't know if she's still there, but Alima, if you have anything, speak up. Any other? Any other comments from anybody?
I have a question.
Andy?
So is there any potential to, with what facilities we have now, to put something in place for electric so that we can, based on what we've got, that we can, like your next door neighbor buys a car, all of a sudden they put a charging station outside the garage door. And I know it's more complicated than that with a fleet of buses, but is there some incremental step you can take that's can be then enveloped into a larger project that's not, just throwing the money away?
I don't know the answer to that. That's something we can certainly talk to Highland about and see if they can give us guidance. Again, I think from Highland's perspective, one of the things they said is, if you're willing to invest the money, and that's why I answered the one question that way, is, you could invest the money and put the infrastructure in at one of your buildings. I mean, we have transformers at buildings, we have the stuff there. We would just need to invest money in order to put it in to temporarily use it. I don't know if you're asking if there's other locations around the township that we could tap into. I'm not aware that we could plug a school bus into another type of facility.
So recapping what I think I heard in that discussion. Thank you. I may need it. What I think we'd like to, so an overwhelming sense that EV is the direction. I think we'd like you and Chris and the team to continue to pursue and develop a plan, for example, on what exactly would the replacement cycle look like year by year. Make some assumptions about when we would actually get to a facility, and how many buses would we buy every year? What year would we start buying EVs? When could we realistically start prototyping them? Let's see more detail than we see on the one slide. I think the majority were interested in a feasibility study. So please bring us at perhaps next month a proposal for a feasibility study to consider at the district office site. We didn't have a lot of discussion on whether we ought to move right ahead this year with the 5 buses and 1 van. I don't know. I don't have my notes, and I know I didn't comment on it. I think we need to do that, given that it's taken so long to get the ones that we deliberately ordered early this cycle, and we still don't have them. I think we ought to at least go out and get pricing and start the process for 5 gas buses and 1 van. At the same time, you can tell us how that fits into the big picture of the replacement cycle over the long term. What else? Yes, we need to move forward on the lease extension. I think it sounds like we need to start with the assumption that we need to bake in the additional few months for the returns of a feasibility study and the discussions that follow. What else did I miss? Anybody? Andy?
In terms of the buses, I know we've got it broken down by vehicle age by 5-year increments. I think it'd be helpful to see their exact age, just as when you say 11 to 15, are 8 of them, are they aging towards 11 or they're closer to 15? Because in terms of replacing them, if they're on the younger side, we may be able to buy ourselves some more time. So I think that would be helpful.
Darlene.
The other thing, can we just find out if there are any partners in our township that we might be able to solicit in terms of charging buses. I'm thinking right now that Temple Ambler, they have electric buses down there. I don't know where they charge, if they have a facility to charge them down there, or if they take them to the city, but I know they do have a couple of the electric buses that run the kids out here down to the city. So I'm just wondering if there are any other facilities that we might be able to partner with.
Jenna?
And I feel like I remember Stan touting that we have township vehicles that are electric as well. So might chat with them as well.
So the township has a plan to migrate towards EV for their fleet is much more complicated than ours, naturally, and we have mostly one type of vehicle. And they have a goal, they have a committee that's formed. That committee has expressed interest in working with the district. I certainly think we should partner with them. It's a community-led committee who've developed a lot of expertise in developing the township plan, and I'm sure would be willing to engage with us on this plan as well. But they don't have, I don't believe the township has at least any significant number of electric vehicles yet, but they have a plan.
And if I get to some of those points, I think the question is, certainly we can look for partners and we'll follow up with Temple Amber. I think we can also talk to Highland about the compatibility of charging stations. Like, is it even compatible with a school bus? They would know that. So that's certainly something we can find out and bring back.
All right. Any last comments on this transportation presentation? So again, there are no recommendations or reports and recommendations in that section of the agenda on this. So it's just advice for the administration at this point. But any last? All right. All right. Well, let's move on to the main part of the meeting. Any announcements, Mr. Leckman?
There are no announcements.
All right. We do have minutes from August 17th. Are members of the committee prepared to accept those minutes?
Can I just ask a quick question about the minutes?
Yes.
I didn't have a chance to go back and look, and this is proof I do look at them. It didn't show any public participation. I couldn't remember if we had any. Are we sure we didn't have any? I didn't see anybody noted as having participated, and I meant to go back and watch the video, and I didn't get a chance, so. Okay, just making sure, yeah. I'm not saying it's wrong, I just didn't,
Yeah,
it struck me as odd, because we usually have participants.
There was public participation last month.
There was or was not?
There was.
Okay, so I think it shows that there wasn't, at least in the,
And actually, the agenda item that I'm looking at right now, there's no link to the minutes that I can see for some reason. Usually there is. Yeah. For me to go back and look, I know I read the minutes at some point, but I don't see them there now.
yeah, I actually just went into the last meeting, like.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me look back at the last minutes. I don't want to approve them unless we're sure they're ready to be approved.
Yeah, so I went to the August 17th meeting, and I just. Okay, yep.
Yeah, so, yeah, can we approve the minutes pending the addition of the community input? And then next month, we will accept a modified version of the minutes that does include the community input. Is that acceptable to everybody?
This to me, yep.
Okay, got that? Yep, okay. Thank you. So let's move on to reports and recommendations, starting with Sandy Run update. Bob?
Yes, we had a very successful opening of the school for the first day of school. Everything went very well. Worked, and I really want to start off that by saying none of that would have been possible without the hard work of Zach Zazo and how he worked with the contractors, Skepton, Watts, the site contractor. Everybody working together, Zach pushing them to find different ways to get things done. They were able to do 6 months of work within 3 months over the summer. Where we are today wasn't supposed to be finished until November. And when we started the process, we were just hoping that we would have enough parking for teachers on day one. We were looking at having 100 to 120 spaces. They were able to get us 187 spaces, paved spaces, for us to use. Some of the contractors using some of those right now, but significantly more space than we expected. Demolition is much further along than we expected, looking back at how the phasing of the projects went. The school itself, everything is going well. As with any new building, we expect there to be bugs that need to be worked out of the systems. Very few and very minor. We have not had any major issues. There's a learning curve. The building, everybody's just fitting right into the building nicely. Coming up to speed on how it operates, how the teachers are using the building. Everything is going very well. With that said, we still have a great bit of work to do outside. Demolition of the building, the actual old building is down. They're working on just removing the rubble and the foundations at this point. We still have 45,000 cubic yards, which equates to about 3,000 dump trucks worth of soil to remove, which will be taken to Twining Park. So that process is set to begin next week. So there will be loads of dump trucks leaving the site. They are working with us. They know when they can be on site working, when they cannot, when they have to stop to let for parent drop-off, buses arriving and pick up at the end of the day. They are working with us on that schedule. They know that they need to stop all their work while that is going on.
Anything to bring our attention to on the budget?
Yeah, just a couple items to note. So last month, Dewey Engineering was here and gave us some information about expected increased costs and where we were at. So I want to note that the contingency in this version that you see in our packet tonight, the contingency was reduced from 1.508 million to 1.309, so a reduction of about 200,000. What's built into that is the township fill adjustment, as Mr. Lester mentioned. So I added $50,000. So adjusted up to 200,000, that's the worst case scenario. Butler balancing, which is the next item, the amendment to the agreement, was added in for 16,200. BSI generator rental was $7,800 roughly, and then furniture and equipment was about 120,000 added into the budget as we wrap up. We are at the end of purchasing furniture and equipment for the building, so that's all built in. The project budget risk areas, again, as Dewey mentioned last month, there's still $614,000 of potential budget risk, but then there are also about $2.17 million of budget opportunities in here for potential savings. So I think all in all, the budget is in very good shape as we enter kind of the final phase of this project.
Thrilling to be in that final phase of this project. But yeah, as Bob said, let's remember it's still a project. So set expectations accordingly. Any comments or questions?
First of all, this is fantastic that we are where we are. I mean, I think that we should be super proud of that. I mean, and not without a lot of hard work. So kudos to the team for doing that. I had a kind of an odd question, but this building is a lot larger than the previous building. How is the staff dealing, the custodial and maintenance staff dealing with the size? How is that fitting at this point?
I'll let Bob give his very technical answer. What I can tell you from each of the custodians, they're thrilled because it's an easier building to clean. The newer a facility, the easier it is to clean, and all of the spaces are kind of open, where in the other building there were lots of nooks and crannies. So, yeah. So I'll let Mr. Lester give a more technical answer.
We're still going through a bit of a learning curve, but a lot of planning went into place. Working with our product suppliers, Hilliard, who we work with for most of our cleaning chemicals, came out. They looked at the building with us, made recommendations. A lot of ways that we were able to increase the productivity of the employees we have now, purchasing additional, better equipment for cleaning, the materials that were selected for the building, make it easier for them to clean certain areas with the technology. So they're able to cover larger places in the hallway. Again, we don't have the amount of stairways that we had when we had the annex and the main building, so that the number of stairs are reduced, the areas that we need to get into to clean. They may be larger areas, but they're easier to clean.
When you talk about technology, does that mean automated equipment or ride-on equipment, or is it still manual?
Most of it was walk-behind equipment. There's new restroom technology that we're working on, carts that you can put into the bathroom where all of our surfaces are spray-down surfaces. We can go in, less time hand cleaning, more sanitizing with machinery.
Great, thank you.
Anyone else? Jenna?
So I'm going to echo that sentiment. One of my kids is in the new school, and it's amazing. I'm glad a lot of parents had a chance to go through it for back to school night, which again was so great that we had it in person. So just enough, in my opinion, we can't say enough about how pleased, at least I am, with the school, and I hope the community feels the same way. I think they do from folks I've spoken to. So one question I had, and I know we covered this a little bit in the last meeting, but I just wanted to see if there was any update. What was the timeline again on exterior lighting? Because I know that's one of the, the parking and exterior lighting were, I think, if I remember correctly, two of the really main hiccups to then opening the facility up for community groups to use the gym and that kind of stuff. So what was the timing on that again, and has it changed?
With the speed that the parking lots were put in, the amount of paved space that we have allowed for more of the lighting bases to be installed as they progressed. Wires are supposed to be next week. They're going to start pulling wiring out. The only part I don't know, and I have a question in to Zach, is does Borough have the poles in their possession at this time? That's the only question I don't know. Being that we moved ahead so quickly with this, I don't know if they actually have them in their yard or if they're still being shipped in.
Just one more note on the building. Dr. Ortiz and I have been looking at dates. We're looking at the first week in October to do the first round of community tours so that the community can have the opportunity to be in the building and see what everyone is raving about. So I would anticipate early next week there will be information coming out from the district.
Dr. Yanni, now that the building is open, inevitably, there will be ways in which we discover that the building is not being used as designed. There are improvements, there are lessons learned, true for facilities management as well. When should we plan to, really debrief and analyze on that stuff for lessons learned for the future?
So I'm thinking sometime around the January, February timeframe. I would love if we could have a meeting over at Sandy Run. At that time, we'll go over those things. One of the things that Dr. Ortiz and his team thought of this summer, the faculty dining room is really far away from the classroom, so we turned that faculty dining room into a satellite cafeteria for kids that might need a little bit of reduced stimuli or quiet environment for lunch. And so we flip-flopped a classroom in that. But what I will say, what we've learned is the intentionality of the planning that went into Sandy Run from the first day of school. Class transitions, super simple. Lunch, going to Unified and Allied Arts. The way the building is spaced and the timing of the schedules, knock on wood, it has been almost flawless with kids transitioning in the building. And having the teams grouped together, class changes are like a minute and a half.
Plenty of time to use your locker.
I had the opportunity to go through, I guess it was the second day of school, and, the kids were, learning how to do their lockers, and there was one student, and he was struggling, and Dr. Yanni and I were standing there, and he came over, and he asked for help. So he was jumped right in, got his locker open for him, and, and it was just wonderful to see. And I just reiterate, just, having been a middle school assistant principal, the fact that there's just so much room, and it just feels so good, and kids can move around, and no one's bumping into anyone, and it's quiet. I mean, kids are, conversing with one another, but it just feels so good in that building. So, yeah, kudos to everybody that put it together, because.
And believe me, I was sweating it as I was trying to open the kids' locker. I thought, if I don't get this right on my first try, I am never going to live this around, because I've got the board president there and a bunch of 12-year-olds looking at me like, is this guy going to be able to do it?
But first try.
Yeah,
It's good.
and I know even though that Mrs. Sherpier and I were not fans of putting all the lockers in, having the lockers with the locks built into the locker and not having the other physical lock has made life for middle school kids and teachers easier. So when we have a meeting over there, I would like to invite Dr. Ortiz and a couple of students to actually talk about their experience in the building as well.
Great. It's always fun. All right, anything else on Sandy Run? Okay, let's jump into the aforementioned agreement with Upper Dublin Township.
Butler balancing. You're on the
I'm looking at
the last
month's
agenda?
agenda,
Okay.
sorry. Yeah, go ahead to the next item.
Yep, so there's not a ton to mention on this. Again, Dewey presented this last month. I mentioned it in the budget update. So this is the amendment. So obviously, we had an agreement with Butler Balancing for a specific amount of money. This adds $16,200 to that. So this just needs to be approved in order to, this work is already done. It's work that Breslin identified after sort of the plans were in place for the HVAC systems, and they needed, Butler Balancing needed to come back and redo some testing and balancing to make sure the system was working appropriately.
Comments or questions?
And you're satisfied with the work that is done on that at this point?
Yeah, I mean, the work's done, the systems are working, so yes, I think we're satisfied.
All right, so we'll move that one forward? Yes. Okay, thank you. Change, an insurance claim contract change.
Yeah, so last month, we approved a number of contracts for the insurance claim. The Procom contract work for the high school in discussions between Utica, ICS, and Procom. The scope was increased quite a bit. This had been in the works and in discussions. It just wasn't finalized by the time we needed to approve the contract last month. So $1,142,811 was added to that contract. Again, this is a contract that Utica is fully paying as part of the insurance claim. So there's no additional cost to the district as a part of this change order, but we will be going through the change order process just like we would for any other contracts, and any changes we will bring back to the board for approval, and Utica will ultimately pay.
Right, so just as a reminder for everybody and for our new member, the way the insurance claims are being handled, we hold the contracts, but it's being paid by the insurance company. Any comments or questions? All right, so we'll move that forward.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Next up is our regular disposal of excess, obsolete, non-repairable equipment. Just a few items in here. Any comments or questions on that? Okay, we'll move that forward.
Yes.
Monthly financials.
Yeah, so quick review of the monthly financials. Again, we're 2 months into the year as of August, closing out August. So total receipts are in line with prior years, 68% compared to 67%. I'll note that we have already received $70,000 of interest income due to the rapidly rising interest rates on deposits. So if anyone's paying attention to what's going on with the Fed and inflation, you've seen the federal funds rate increase over the last 4 months from 0.5% to 2.5%. There's talks right now that the Fed will continue to increase that, 0.75% to 1% even in the upcoming months. So we are already seeing our rate on deposits, so the full flex account with PISLAF, which we have access to on a weekly basis, is around 2.2% right now. So it's good news for us from an interest income perspective. What's unknown really is kind of the long-term plan. Inflation numbers didn't come in great this week when they came out, so I can't see any near-term reduction in interest rates, but things are progressing well there from an interest rate standpoint. Total expenses are slightly behind the prior year at 4% of budget as compared to 6%. That is primarily due to the pay of our 10-month staff, our teachers and UDSD staff that are 10 months. So last year, the first pay actually fell in August. This year, the first pay didn't fall till September. So that'll get caught up as we close out September. On the other financial reports, just a couple items to note. On page 2 of that report, assessed value is trending about $10.4 million better than budget. 3.2% is from district-initiated appeals. 7.2 of that is from new developments. Again, that's not 7.2 million of new revenue, it's new assessed value. Property tax collections have actually been stronger than we've ever seen them in the past. So if you notice on the tax collector report, we've collected 89% of the taxes billed as of the end of August. So the end of August is a good metric because that's the end of the discount period. In the prior 2 years, that was closer to 85%. So very strong tax collections this year. EIT continues to trend strong, about 6% increase over the prior year. And transfer tax, home sales, we had 43 transactions, slightly above average, and 135,000 in revenue, which is also slightly above average. So things trending well in the first 2 months of the year.
All right, comments or questions on the monthly financial reports? Art's not here, so we don't.
No, you didn't.
All right, so we'll move those forward? Yes. All right, thank you. The next year's, already talking about next year's general fund budget.
It is already time to start talking about the 23-24 general fund budget process. So what you have here tonight is a draft timeline. It's pretty standard that we begin talking about this in September. What is unique about this year, and we haven't really heard why or don't understand it at this point, is typically by this point in time we have the full timeline around the Act 1 budget process for the year. Last year I had it by the beginning of August. This year we still don't have it. PASBO is currently working on it and notes that it's not yet available, but we will certainly update this when we have that final Act 1 timeline. That Act 1 timeline is critical for us because it lets us know where all of the deadlines are that we need to meet, as a district and as a board to approving both our preliminary budget in the November to January timeframe and then our final budget in June of this year. So page 1 really lays out the steps. Obviously, there's no definitive dates in there, but it lays out the steps of the process of the budget. So as you all know, and for our new board member, we have a very critical step that comes up as part of the preliminary budget process. And that is to make a decision of if we are going to approve a preliminary budget and apply for exceptions to go beyond the Act 1 index, or to approve a resolution to opt out and basically say that the board does not intend to raise or pass a budget that increases taxes beyond the Act 1 index. So the Act 1 index right now is, again, not finalized. PASBO does calculate it. It is based off of publicly available data, is projected to be 4.1% for the 23-24 year. So my hope is that a decision can be made by November to determine the path. That's the timeline that we used last year. And I don't think, based on where our budget currently stands, that the administration would be feeling the need for a recommendation beyond the Act 1 index. So again, that's just preliminarily based on how we closed last year, how things are trending already this year, and the strength of some of the new revenue from new developments that are coming in. At next month's finance meeting, we will review the estimated 21-22 results, the results from last year. Again, we reviewed that last month. Nothing has changed drastically. We will start our audit in 2 weeks, next week, the end of next week already. Time is flying. So we'll be able to bring back kind of solidified results that we've turned over to the auditors for them to review. We'll talk about our 5-year projection model, including our key assumptions for review and discussion, and then discussion about the process. Revenues will continue to be carefully monitored. We look at them every single month here. I give you reporting. So the revenue projections will inform our preliminary 23-24 revenue projections, and expenses for the preliminary budget will be benchmarked based off of known factors, trends, baseline assumptions, and we'll look at that all in the upcoming months. A needs-based budget philosophy will continue to be used. And details will be created for January to April timeframe. If you notice, there's a lot of TBD dates in here, even as you look out, because the board, committee, and legislative meetings are not set yet until the December timeframe. So, and that will all lead up to eventually at the end of the year, a proposed final and a final budget. So it's a 10-month process, and we'll continue to work through it. Any question? And again, this is a draft. I will continue to bring updates of this, especially as the full Act 1 timeline becomes available.
Mr. Leckman said it nicely that he doesn't think we'll be recommending to go above. We won't be. I can tell you my recommendation, and I know without speaking for the board, it has been clear over the last couple of years that not only will we stay below the Act 1 index, we'll do what we can to keep the tax increase so that we build educationally and operationally sound budgets that also honor our community.
All right, so we're really just talking about the timeline now. You know, I know you weren't trying to speak for the board, and I don't want to speak for the whole board either, but I feel pretty comfortable saying that it is extremely likely the recommendation in November will be to proceed with the opt-out path, but that decision doesn't happen until November. Any other comments or questions on the timeline? Okay, thank you for that. No action to take on that item. Once again, we're bringing back the assist services agreement.
Yeah, so this is one where I get to publicly say I missed last month. So in August, we approved this agreement. We brought it to the Finance Committee meeting. The Finance Committee made a request to go back to our vendor and ask for a reduction in the rate where we paid a surplus on. We had made some pretty good changes to the contract. When we talked to the vendor about this, they sent us back the wrong version, and it was just completely overlooked. So this is one where we need to bring back the correct contract to the board for approval and to be ratified at the September legislative meeting. And that's why the language is in there, that it's just we're bringing it back for approval. It's a updated version of the contract that was already approved.
And does incorporate the changes that we discussed in August. Yeah, August, right? It was August, right? We discussed that?
August, we discussed that,
Yeah.
and the board approved it at the legislative meeting.
All right. Any comments or questions on that? Okay, so we'll move that forward. Yes. All right, and last, financial support for North Hills.
Each year, the district makes a contribution to the North Hills program. We are, again, recommending a donation to pay for expenses related to after-school tutoring and academic services in the amount not to exceed $45,000. We've been very pleased with the development of the program, the number of students that they're serving, the collaboration that we're having between the program and the district, and the progress that students are making. So we're recommending once again, and these funds are budgeted.
While we're discussing this, could you just, the financial model for that program has changed over the last couple of years. Could you just sort of summarize the changes and where we are with that?
So for years, the Upper Dublin Education Foundation provided management and oversight of the program. 7 Mile Road Church, 7 Mile Road, okay, took over, members of the church formed the New Hope Collective, and they now are the governing body of the program. I sit on their education committee, and we have lots of communication back and forth between the staff there at North Hills and us here in the district. A number of our staff volunteer over there in addition to the paid staff that we have. And we've seen the numbers of students consistently participating in the program are substantially higher than in the past. So last year, the average daily attendance was somewhere between 17 and 22 students. In previous years, it was anywhere between 8, 10, and 12. So I think the program has definitely been revitalized, and it's a real service to our students.
All right, comments or questions?
Since we see more participation, more staff, is the 45, is the amount what they requested, or is that what the district is?
The amount has remained static, and it's remaining static because their funding model now also includes fundraising and some additional donations from the township. So we're comfortable with the funding.
And this is more for maybe the ed committee, but yeah, are you following data to see the returns on this investment, if you want to put it really crudely?
We are. And when we do our data presentation next month, we'll talk about, we won't be sharing that because on certain grade levels, the data is like 1 or 2 kids, but we'll be able to show you what data we're keeping and what data that we're sharing with them so that they have sort of a roadmap of where to help kids when they attend the program.
And I think it's also notable that there are staff members who are volunteering their time, which is fantastic.
Yeah, last year we had consistently 5 staff members that volunteer time weekly.
Any other comments or questions? If any board members haven't had a chance to go over there and see the program in action, I would encourage you to do so. It's pretty great. All right, so we'll move that forward.
Yes.
All right, thank you. So we are up to public participation. If anyone in the audience would like to speak, please come to the microphone. We'll have 4 minutes. Please state where in your name and where in the township you reside.
Thanks. Anita Brister, Fort Washington. So I'm going to start with my own questions, and I'll try to see what I can fit in on the bus garage. And actually, I'm just going to, this wasn't on my original list, but I'm just going to mention it. So some board history. Facilities and finance used to be 2 separate meetings. And this is a really good example of how this probably could have been 2 separate meetings. Maybe I'm just saying that because I'd like 8 minutes. But I'll throw this to you, Dr. Yanni, and you can answer afterwards. Did you change it? I don't think Dr. Wheeler changed it. And the only reason I'm saying that is because she's the one that started the whole Sandy Run project. And when you're doing a bus garage or a middle school or any big facilities project, actually, I'll just say this applies to anything for me. The devil is always in the details. And it's really hard to nail down these details when it's all lumped together. So I came tonight kind of focused mentally on finance, but the whole bus depot thing is facilities. You might want to consider when you have a lot going on, juggling, that you might want to make 2 different meetings. So my question is, when did this change? I guess it was 4 or 5 years ago. My original questions are just simple financial stuff that's not in the packet. And I ask this every year. And Mark usually gives me an answer in an email. So here we go again. I think comparative data is really important. I know that the IU provides it to all business managers, but we, the community, we don't get it unless the business manager puts it all out there, because the IU doesn't provide it for the public in general. So one of my favorite questions, how does Upper Dublin's current millage rate compare to the other 20 districts in Montgomery County? Last year, Mark did send me some comparative data via email, and we were the 7th highest in millage compared to the others. Now that everyone's tax rate has been set for this next year, I'm just wondering, are we still 7th highest? Did we change a position up or down? Second question, which is kind of related to transportation, because I think it's where you'll get these numbers, and I've asked this before, but I kind of like to keep track of it. What percent of children in Upper Dublin attend non-public school? I think you get the data because you know through your transportation. So what percent attend non-public school? And I guess part of why I'm asking is I always like to know, is that percentage stable or changing? When I say stable or changing, could you give me an idea over the last 10 years? Are we looking at roughly the same percent attend non-public, or has there been any kind of significant change there? Transportation, I don't know where to begin. One minute. So I'd like to get it away from Fort Washington Elementary playground, or away from Fort Washington Elementary. I think it's one of the benefits of a nice suburban district is that you shouldn't have buses right on top of a playground. And you're going to tell me it's not on top of a playground. I know the building pretty well. It's too close for my comfort level. And it's ugly. It's ugly. I mean, at least do the feasibility study. It's definitely not ideal to have it next to the administration offices, but you got 9 acres to deal with. I think Darlene mentioned that. That's a lot better than trying to jam it into 3 acres. At least do the study and see what info you get. I don't know why I'm shocked, because I shouldn't be. I don't consider myself naive. When every board member says, well, no, Mr. Kessler, I give you credit. You brought up some real concerns. You did not jump on that bandwagon. But almost everybody said, yep, it's totally great to have, we're going electric. But if you look at the document that you put out, and Mark emphasized it, it's $100,000 for a gasoline-powered bus versus $300,000, and then 4 hours to charge, and then the infrastructure. Where's the cost analysis? I'm like totally like confused. Where's the cost analysis, a 5 to 10 year cost analysis of what it will cost Upper Dublin, and that means Upper Dublin taxpayers, to fully transition to electric? And I think Mr. Kessler said it well, that there are a lot of moving parts here. I'm saying this part, the devil's in the details. When we're talking about $100,000 versus $300,000, and everybody's saying, yeah, let's do it, you're not saying, let's partially do it or move part of our fleet, or we'll do it gradually this way. It's a big, big price difference. So I think I'd like to see a real cost comparison before you all jump on that bandwagon. Thanks.
Caitlin Johnson. I am from Ambler, and I have 3 kids that go to Fort Washington and 1 who's still home. And I believe I was at the meeting that was August 17th, and I believe we did, correct me if I'm wrong, you gave the presentation about the air quality for Fort Washington. And I did ask about it, and I asked, were we going to talk about this any time recently? And I was told that, oh, no, we'll probably talk about the lease maybe sometime in spring. Then I wake up this morning, I look on Facebook, and I see they're talking about bus people again. And I'm like, oh, my goodness. I was kind of surprised. But maybe that was me just being out of the loop because, like I said, I'm busy at home with kids. And I've talked to some neighbors, and sometimes it's kind of like a growing theme where they feel like, transparency, we're being transparent. But then a second later, we've already done these other things that just happen to be really good with the plan we think we want to do, and we're not really giving you a plan B. And so I came here asking for a plan B, and then I looked in here and I was like, oh my gosh, great, there's a plan B. I'm like, oh, I can breathe. At least I feel like we're being heard somewhat. And then I'm in the meeting and I hear people like, some like wavering about even giving us a plan B. And as a community member from Fort Washington, have lived my whole life in Fort Washington, and I'm looking at the Fort Washington that my kids go to that looks like a hot mess at the moment. And then this, it's just a little bit discouraging, but I'm glad that by the time everybody talked through it and worked through it, that they saw that it was worth even giving us a chance. Our budget's what, I don't know, millions of dollars, and like $15,000 to me sounds like reasonable to be able to give us a second chance of not having more put on Fort Washington community. And then I understand the time aspect. 3 months seems like well worth being to make sure we're 100% sure that we can tell our community members we tried and this is still what's best. We have this huge Upper Dublin, and we can't find a spot, but yet we're at least saying we're full-heartedly going to give you a second option, and we're going to look through it and look at it with like mind wide open that it is a possibility, because what, there's 9 acres opposed to the 3. I don't even know. I guess I'm just still a little surprised. Oh, sorry, with the time aspect. Yeah, I believe the 3 months, yes, it's 3 months. But a lot of us have been doing construction, and my house was delayed. Like, we didn't get windows for a month. Like, I get it. Like, we're living it. I get it. But sometimes you rather do it right than do it quickly. And I feel like this is a big decision that we cannot change, and we can't go back once you've already broken ground and started. And I would hate to not be able to sleep at night thinking that, like, you didn't take all the steps that could have got us to a really good place. And I feel like a lot of us would feel better if we truly believed that you would listen to us when we said we didn't want it on Field of Dreams. My kids have started on Field of Dreams. They do. My son loves baseball, all because of quick ball. And I feel like we said, we don't want it here, we don't want to hear, the community doesn't want to hear. And you're like, okay, fine, we won't put it here, we'll put it right next to it. And then the community members are like, I don't know if we're still being heard. But at least now I feel like we're getting a little bit heard by us having a plan B, even if it turns out it's like way more expensive or some huge downfall, which I doubt. At least we feel like you listened. So I'm sorry for my huge rant, but thank you.
Okay, I see nobody else coming to the mic, but we did have one comment submitted online, which I will read. If I find where I pulled it up. All right. This one is from Ginny Vitella and Ambler. A, the deal with Arcadia. I thought this was on the agenda for the Education Committee to vote. This should also fall under finances. I don't believe it's a fair deal for UD with our brand new, very expensive planetarium. It doesn't matter that we've had this deal for 19 years. It's renewable each year and should be amended. Arcadia should pay a fee for the use based on an overhead cost analysis. Just allowing 2 UD students at half tuition is not enough, and it delivers no income to UD. It's only a potential personal financial benefit for 2 students. B, busing. Clearly an ongoing problem. Do we need better planning with routes? Should we or can we start contracting out so that kids don't miss out on sports or have to leave school so early and miss school, or even others that don't get home until well after school for buses that do 2 runs? There's no reason a sport should be canceled because we can't get the kids to practice. Can we get parent waivers so other parents can carpool? C, bus depot. We don't need and can't afford an $8 million project, and we definitely don't want it at FWES and Field of Dreams lot. D, why can't we use the field at SRMS outside the cafeteria for some fall sports practices? This would help with busing and help avoid canceling a practice on a beautiful day. E, when will the outside lighting be complete at SRMS? F, when will the roof be complete over the pool? When can the kids who participate in water polo, UDHS swim team, and UDAC get back into the pool? Thank you. So with that, I will close community input, and we'll see if there are responses, starting with the administration.
Sure. Combining the committees, Mr. Sirota, keep me honest here, I believe that was the decision that we jointly came to when Ms. Franczyk was the president, correct?
I don't remember exactly what year it was. I remember I advocated for that, and I think the reason I advocated for that was there was so much overlap between the two anyway. We were doing them on the same night. It didn't seem to make a lot of sense to separate them. All of them basically report in through the same administrator. The same administrator could lead them. That was my thinking at the time, I think. Certainly we can revisit it, and when we reorganize in December, that would be the time to do that.
And I think, one of the things, so we paired education and committee or policy the same night. We didn't pair anything with this, knowing that there might be times where we have an extended meeting because we're doing a big project or because we're going through the budget or what have you. Regarding the timing of when we were going to talk about the bus garage. I have to go back and listen to the meeting to make sure that my memory serves, but I remember in the spring saying that we wouldn't talk about it over the summer because folks are away and might not be at meetings or might not be watching, and so the lease for the facility expires, in the spring and summer, but that we would talk about it during the school year. But I'll go back and listen to those parts of the meetings. I think the piece about something good just happening to be done at Fort Washington, i.e. the transformer being there. The transformer's there because of the modulars. I would argue that the board is listening. As I listened to the board tonight, wanting to do, at least explore the second site. I don't think there's no decision until there's a board vote. And tonight we weren't asking for the board to vote on where the facility would be. It would just be planning for the future. And when the time comes for there to be a decision, obviously those meetings will be widely advertised. Mr. Leckman, what else did I miss? Oh, the millage rate. That's something, I'm not sure that the IU provides it anymore or not, do they?
No, I usually update that each year, and it's in the budget presentations. So that's something that would be in the budget presentations that we start in November.
Okay, right. So I think to that point, we can look forward to seeing that and where we are now in comparison to other Montgomery.
And then there was a comment about percentage of non-public students or number of non-public students. So from transportation, we don't get that. We only get the requests for non-public school students that want to utilize our transportation.
That being said, we can bring back that number next month. We don't know about students that, as Mr. Leckman said, if they don't request transportation, we don't know about the student. So, but we can get the exact number and bring that back next month of the kids that we know that request transportation.
In terms of other feedback regarding the discussion about the transportation being a surprise. So last month, there was a comment by a committee member suggesting that we were going to need to talk about this again, and I said, yeah, we're going to need to talk about it again, but we had nothing to talk about last month yet. So we do need to talk about it, so we brought it back to discuss. No formal action being taken tonight. This will inevitably be a topic next month because we did ask the administration to bring back some topics for discussion next month. The data that I've shared in the past regarding tax rates is public data. It's available from PDE's website. They nominally say they'll update it at the end of August every year with statewide millage rates. They never update it at the end of August. It has not yet been updated this year. Last year, I think after me begging them several times, I got a direct email copy in November, and they finally updated the website in March. So as soon as it is available, I'll pass that along. We do have the Montgomery County numbers because Monco also keeps track of that, and I can pass that along, but we don't have the statewide numbers yet. Let's see, was there anything else? I'll just remind the community, especially because we have a new board member here, some of the comments were really questions for the administration, like when will outside lighting be complete? We did cover that already. You can always feel free to email the administration or the board with those kinds of questions. You don't need to wait for a board meeting. That's not really the purpose of public participation at board meetings. It's really to advise the board on things we may be voting on in the future. Let's see. I wanted to ask about, there was a question about maybe alternate solutions for transportation. We did talk about earlier, it would take a legislative change for us to have waivers for students who thought they weren't going to use transportation, and therefore we wouldn't need to reserve a spot for them. But there was a similar question about transportation to sports events. Do we have to provide transportation? Can we allow, is there something about allowing kids to carpool that?
I will get the exact legal language, but because we're moving kids off-site, particularly from Sandy Run, it not providing transportation would create a barrier for students that couldn't provide that transportation. In terms of transportation waivers, I know there have been some districts in the past that have done it. There's some legal entanglements there, but we'll get that information and make sure the board has it.
Okay. That's all I got. Any other comments or questions on public, what is that? Oh, pool roof?
Just going to say that. So the pool is already open. As of September 15th, I think tomorrow, the plan is to open the pool back up. So the roof is not complete, but it's watertight and will be able to be used. So
That's correct, yeah. So the roof's in condition that we can be in the pool under it. The big concern before was when the metal deck was being taken off the roof to replace, that we'd have items falling into the pool. So we put the pool cover on to catch any debris that was falling. We removed the pool cover yesterday, started cleaning the pool today, and the first session is for water polo on Friday morning.
Okay. Any other comments or questions on public participation? Jenna?
So there was one other question about the fields at Sandy Run. My understanding is they're not ready for use yet,
the field right outside of the cafeteria, that field has sod on it.
Right.
And the the real recommendation was not to do any kind of heavy use there because it'll just kill the field and then it will take it offline. Once that takes root, I think in the spring it'll be able to be used. But I know, Mr. Lester, the installation of the turf field is happening ahead of schedule? Artificial field? A little bit.
Yeah, the artificial turf field is still, will be ready for next fall. Be very close in the spring. They still have all the dirt to remove, build the retaining wall, installation of drainage. So there's a lot of work to do there still. The sod field we can use for light use during recess, gym class even, but any sports activities really should wait probably even past the spring. We'll need to be taking a look at it, how the roots actually adhered. Any heavy activity, anybody sliding across could disrupt the roots and slide the sod.
And while we're on the topic, Bob, just a reminder of the timeline for the softball, baseball, and other multi-use field down below.
Yes, still that's all part of the ongoing site work. As long as weather cooperates, hopefully they'll be finished this fall, those fields. But again, we're going to need a year's worth of growth before we can use those fields.
Right, so we're still quite some time away before having useful athletic fields at Sandy Run. Anyone else?
Mark, one other. I just also wanted to respond to the comment about the EV technology and, that we're jumping on the bandwagon. I just want to make clear, we didn't make any decisions tonight whatsoever. We're still, I think, a long way away from, pulling any kind of trigger about authorizing expenditures. I mean, I think what you heard here tonight is that we're all very supportive and interested in EV technology, obviously to reduce our carbon footprint. But, certainly, that's why I asked the question about how much do the buses cost. There's a lot of data I think we're going to gather over the coming months, frankly. I think we're jumping on the bandwagon saying it's something we want to pursue, which is the guidance that we gave, but we by no means said, yes, we're going to build we're going to buy a whole fleet of EV buses tomorrow. So I just want to make that comment.
Yep. All right. Any last comments? All right, so I will announce our next Finance Committee meeting will be Wednesday, October 19th at 6 p.m. Here in the Cardinal Room, and with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.